So welcome to PD to Teach. We're at our next filming and we're on the strand Author's Purpose and Craft. What we're doing today is just holding a collegial conversation, and we're talking about how to best equip teachers to address and train on these new standards. So let's start with the knowledge and skill statement for Author's Purpose and Craft. The Author's Purpose and Craft knowledge and skill statement asks students to use critical inquiry, analyze authors' choices. Now, here's where we start breaking apart the knowledge and skill statement. They have to analyze how the author's choices influence and communicate the meaning of a text. There's a lot more in this knowledge and skill statement. It goes on to say how they analyze author's craft and how they apply author's crafts purposefully. Why? To develop products and performances. That's a lot that's happening in a knowledge and skill statement. So let's grow this up, the vertical team, and talk about what just the knowledge and skill statement, we haven't even gotten into a student expectation, what the knowledge and skill statement means in the lower grades.
As we're looking at the lower grades and we're trying to delve into that critical inquiry and the analysis of the author's craft, we're really taking a look at what did the author do on purpose? Because the students need to understand that everything that an author does, there's intention behind it. There are text features that are used intentionally, there is font that's used intentionally, white space, illustrations, and letting students really start to notice those things on their own and encouraging them to slow down and look a little bit more carefully whenever they're looking at any kind of text, whether it be a print text or digital or just a visual text.
It's also very important that we are mindful of the questions that we're using to guide that thinking. I think that as our kindergarten through fourth grade students think about text and look at the organization of it, that we as educators facilitate that by questions. How did they organize this? Why did they do that? What was their choice? What do you think they were thinking when they wrote that? Putting themselves in that role of that author and then extending that thinking. If you were going to keep writing this book, what would you do? Make it more curious and just a little bit more interactive for them. We're not just reading a text, we're analyzing and understanding what the author is saying, why they said it, and how they said it.
So the other part of this knowledge and skill statement is that they analyze and apply the craft to their own products and performances. How is that different from the current standards that we have?
Well, I think it's very interesting because it ties it directly to composition and response, because the kids are taking these things that they're noticing, that they're observing, that they are analyzing, and they're applying it in the things that they write and the things that they create. I even like that it really references performances, because I know that one of the things we work on in the primary grades is retelling. How can the students use some of that author's craft and the purpose behind it to create a purposeful retelling and incorporate some of those things that an author used, such as repetition, to work with the audience. They have that purpose behind what they're performing and what they're producing as well.
It changes from our previous TEKS to we were looking at a text and saying, what does this mean? And we did have a few questions on assessment that said, why did the author do it this way? But I think that's what we're really moving more toward, is when the kid reads a text, becoming aware of what were the purposeful decisions that author was making. You were talking about that book right there, Follow the Moon Home. Mm-hmm. If they begin viewing a text in a way that says and honors the whole point of it, meaning, influence and communicate meaning, they realize that the author was doing something on purpose to them. The author obviously wanted to do something to them with their words. They wanted to influence their thinking, their feeling, or their knowing in some way. That's kind of neat to have that. That's a good way to look at text, but it really goes much deeper than that. How do I then use that text to say, you know, I need to say something too. There's something that I'm curious about, that I'm wondering about, that I want to write about too. How can I write like Cousteau? How can I make choices about text structure, about font size, about blending a story with some back matter that gives some background? I can do that too.
A lot of times in these literary nonfiction pieces, a lot of authors will put in the research that they did behind the story that they told. And what I've noticed in the past is that we've done so many read alouds or readings that are so separate and segregated from any other learning that the students are doing. When we could tie this to another book and get them curious about something else and get them kind of starting them on this little curiosity road. And one of the things that I love on the back matter is that students can tie this straight into those inquiry and research strands to where I'm curious about loggerhead sea turtles now where can I go? And right here it says internet resources and links. It gives you a place to look for those students who want to know more, and it takes away that isolated research that we've always done in the past, at least we have in my district, and it lets students understand that curiosity and research and inquiry happen all the time while we're reading and all the time while we're writing. Because imagine if a student had read this and we pointed out this back matter and we looked and noticed the things that the author did, and they're writing an all about book, why couldn't they put in their own back matter and put in some of those resources? That's a really great way of them taking what they've analyzed and noticed and applying it to their own writing.
I don't know if you've ever talked to a sophomore recently, but sophomores have tons of opinions. They have lots that they want to say, but they don't always feel like they have the means to say it. It's about helping these kids find a way to find their voice, especially in the times that we're in right now. And especially when you're talking about student-selected texts. You may have kids coming in choosing anything they want to, and it's really about helping them find that meaningful mentor text, something they can grab onto, something they identify with, something they can take something away from and use and say, this is something I can pattern myself after. This is something I see myself in. I just recently learned about textual lineages. I'd never heard that word before, but helping them find those pieces that they gravitate to and they love and they recognize and identify with. And I think that's going to be a real help, especially with our high school students and all the way down, even to K.
What I heard from Shona and you, Jonathan, as well, the part of the strand where it says it helps develop the part where it says it helps to develop his or her own product, that's beautiful. And what I like about it is a student can take a piece that they like, they enjoy, and in the past it was you read it, you might take an AR test, you might do a book report, you throw it away, you're done with it. I think this strand is beautiful because what it does is it challenges a student who would never want to write or ever think about writing to decode what an author has written and talk deeply about why they did stuff. And once they figure out that formula, they can set themselves up with their own scenario, creating their own story, and see if they can create that same formula, that same situation in what they're writing. And it's a challenge because the first time you do it, it won't be as good as the 15th time you do it. So now you have a kid who's resistant to writing, and now that he wants to try to create something like his favorite author, like what he was passionate about. And so now writing is not so boring or so cliche, and it's not about writing a 5-page essay. It's about how can I deepen my reader's understanding for what I've learned.
So I want to focus on that part of the knowledge and skill statement as well, where it says the student analyzes and applies author's craft purposefully. In our current TEKS, the old TEKS, we did that in reading as a means to access meaning. We didn't quite analyze. What we did was we identified. So for example, we identified figurative language, and it lived in the literary text subcomponent of our old standards. Well, now we have a widened lens into a variety of texts. So we can now analyze figurative language, not just in literary texts, but how authors authentically use it in a variety of texts. And so when children begin to analyze that, when they begin to get curious about, I wonder why the author did this, then they begin to reach and build their bank. They build a repertoire of tools that for a struggling writer would not happen. A struggling writer struggles to reach for what can I do to inform my piece. And so now this analysis of author's craft allows me to then bring in lots of things that authors are doing, and then I select from that bank and I say, I am going to now use like Philip Cousteau does in this text, and I'm going to employ that in my piece. And I think that's a big shift for us, from identifying the use of it in a particular confined text to now looking at the use of something like figurative language across text, and then saying, what do I want to do with that when I go to employ it purposefully?
So as you have all been talking, we're hinting at and we're talking about that word influence, which implies a personal connection to the reading and the writing that they're doing. And differentiation and relevance is huge in all of our campuses and all of our districts. And that influence, that word influence, gives teachers the ability to say, pick up a book that means something to you and then find a way to use what that author does, like repetition or complex compound sentences or parallelism or whatever, or as simple as onomatopoeias for our little ones, and use it in your own writing so that you can influence other people about what you care about. It makes differentiation easy.
I think a lot of the times our kids are really, I think it's underestimated what they can come up with on their own. In literature circles, you know, I have a group reading Hatchet by Gary Paulson, and it is, they're noticing the repetition over and over, and you know, they're having these discussions, and I walk up and I'm like, well, why do you think, you know, the author did that? And well, you know, this divorce was really, you know, painful for him, and he's consistently thinking about that. And so I think they notice those things, and so we jot down things, repetition. We just have a list, and they don't know what the list is for yet, but I think having that list to realize that we're going to use those things in our writing, and you liked that, you noticed it, maybe try doing something like that. And also the figurative language piece in any of the books that we've read, that we're seeing those figurative language examples in novels and how they use that and why did he say it that way, you know. And so we have a figurative language list also, and so we're using some of those things, and we have an idiom journal where we're just writing those things down and what those mean, and I'm starting to see those in their writings, and it's just fabulous to see them apply those things without it necessarily being a lesson. They're noticing it on their own.
Liza, I was working with a student conferencing on their paper, and the teacher had been teaching image grammar, brushstrokes, and the kid says, I said, well, how's it going? And he says, Miss, I just need a vivid verb. And I'm like, okay. Why do you need a vivid verb? Because she says I have to have one. Well, I think that's where we're getting to with what this strand does. We don't want to have a simile because your teacher says you have to have a simile in your composition. Mm-hmm. We want you to have a simile because you have something to say that by using a simile, it will help the reader see what you're saying or to understand what you mean. That's the thing that brings the relevance into them and into their work. And so instead of saying, hey, read this, you know, and I'm going to tell you what to think about it and how to analyze that, and I'm going to question you through the text, this is different. Mm-hmm. It's why do you want to read this, and what are you going to do with it? It's the relevance of why we read and how it informs what we can then do in turn.
In talking about the knowledge and skills statement, a lot of us referenced how the 2009 standards were almost a checkbox. Taught characterization? Check. Taught point of view? Check. And I think this strand goes deeper than that, and it gives us a lot more room to work with.